All right, good afternoon and welcome everybody. Today is July 21st, and this is actually Assisting Ukrainian Nationals Part 2. And today's webinar is a kind of a follow-up to the first webinar that we did on March 11th, which we did shortly after Russia had invaded Ukraine. We talked about some ideas at that time about assisting Ukrainians, and now we're sort of following up with this second session to lay out three pathways that Ukrainians can be assisted to have legal status in the United States. So I'm going to go through that, and the information is available on the various websites, USCIS websites and other websites. But let's walk through some of the requirements. So the Uniting for Ukraine program, or U4U, was created by the Department of Homeland Security with an announcement by President Biden. And Uniting for Ukraine provides a pathway for Ukrainian citizens and their immediate family members who are outside the United States to come to the U.S. and stay temporarily for a 2-year period of parole. Now, the key here is that private individuals in the United States can act as supporters. So it's kind of like being a sponsor, but they're using the term supporter. And those US-based supporters are going to initiate the process by filing the Form I-134. Now, the supporter agrees to provide the Ukrainian beneficiaries with financial support for the duration of their stay in the United States, right? So it's for people who are willing to make this kind of a commitment. So the requirements for being a supporter of a Ukrainian national, they have to be legally residing in the US. Now, there's no need to be a US citizen or a lawful permanent resident. Others who are legally residing in the US as non-immigrants or asylees or parolees or TPS holders or beneficiaries of deferred action and possibly other statuses are eligible to act as supporters. The key, what you have to have sufficient financial means and pass some additional vetting as well. Now, as far as who is eligible to be a beneficiary of Uniting for Ukraine, they have to have resided in Ukraine immediately before the Russian invasion, so through February 11, 2022, and they were displaced as a result of the invasion. They're a Ukrainian citizen and they possess a valid Ukrainian passport, or they might be a child included on a parent's passport, or they could also be an immediate family member, namely a spouse or a common law partner or child under 21 of the Ukrainian citizen beneficiary who has a valid passport. And they have to have a supporter who filed Form I-134 on their behalf, and that USCIS has vetted and confirmed as sufficient. And that beneficiary has to clear their biometrics and security checks. And children under the age of 18 have to be traveling to the US in the care and custody of their parent or legal guardian. So the procedure is for the US supporter to file Form I-134 online at uscis.gov. The vetting process determines whether the supporter has the sufficient financial means, and the additional vetting is really designed to prevent abuse of the program, i.e. to detect possible instances of potential trafficking and other abuses. After vetting, the Ukrainian national beneficiaries will be notified, and then they'll complete their part of the process online, their application online, and they'll receive permission to travel. And then upon arrival at the port of entry, Customs and Border Protection makes a final determination whether to parole the individual or individuals into the United States. Now, who's not eligible for Uniting for Ukraine? Okay, those not eligible would include Ukrainian citizens who are present in the US. However, Ukrainian citizens present in the US might be eligible for TPS, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. Now, who else is not eligible would be children traveling without their parent or legal guardians. Upon arrival at a port of entry, if a child is not traveling with their parent or legal guardian, they could be placed in the Department of Health and Human Services to protect them from dangers such as trafficking or other forms of exploitation. And children who are not traveling with their parent or legal guardian, but who are coming to the US to meet their parent or legal guardian, may instead seek parole through the standard Form I-131 humanitarian parole process. All right, so that's Uniting for Ukraine. And someone did post a question here. someone or a comment, they said they finally received 4 Uniting for Ukraine travel document authorizations after fighting with USCIS for a couple of months. The authorizations look pretty informal, which made my clients nervous. Has anyone had any issue at the port of entry? I would definitely, kind of network with your colleagues through the various Facebook groups and ask them. If somebody here in this webinar among the participants has actually had their clients utilize the travel documents and they want to share any experience, you can feel free to write that in the chat comments as well. We welcome comments. But yeah, a lot of times those documents they can be in the form of a letter, basically. So I can see your client's point. I mean, the program is very recently created and was created in response to an emergency. So keep that in mind. The next program that we're going to talk about is the Lautenberg program. Now, this has been in existence for many years. The Lautenberg program is administered by the Department of State, and this is a refugee program under the auspices of the State Department. It's named, for Senator Frank Lautenberg, who, was a senator a number of years ago, a couple of decades ago. It was begun in 1989, and it is a refugee program that processes cases for religious minorities living in the countries of the former Soviet Union, and it processes cases in country. And the program must be reapproved on an annual basis. Now, because it has to be reapproved on an annual basis, the application dates vary year by year. So this year in 2022, the application period is from March 15th until September 23rd. There's no filing fee for the Lautenberg program. And the affidavit of relationship is what's filed. So that's a kind of document. They have to have the individuals seeking admission to the United States as a refugee through the Lautenberg program. They have to have a U.S. tie, which is a relative in the United States who's going to file an affidavit of relationship. And then the U.S. tie files the affidavit of relationship, and then on that affidavit are mentioned the information about the individuals who are going to be the beneficiaries of the program. Now, the U.S. tie must be 21 years old or married and must be either a U.S. citizen, permanent resident, asylee, or refugee. The principal applicant who's going to benefit from the program must be 21 years old or married and a citizen of a former Soviet country, as well as a member of a religious minority and able to prove this. So the program originally dealt mostly with the Jewish population in the former Soviet Union, but that's in recent years that's been expanded to evangelical Christians, Ukrainian Greek Catholics, and members of the Ukrainian Autocephalous Orthodox Church. The principal applicant has to be related to the U.S. tie in certain ways. They have to be either a spouse, parent, child, sibling, grandparent, or grandchild of the U.S. tie relative. And every applicant, in addition to the principal applicant, must be a citizen of a former Soviet country and also a member of the religious minority to get approved. Individuals who are not directly related to the principal applicant but are living in the same household may be considered for processing on a case-by-case basis. So you're usually dealing with a refugee resettlement agency in the U.S. when you're filing the affidavit of relationship for the Lautenberg. And I know agencies, for example, agencies such as HIAS, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, have traditionally been involved in these types of programs. There's a number of them. A number of those organizations. And I'm going to post a number of links in our, along with this video, where links to both the government websites and to the resettlement agencies who deal with this type of program. So I want to skip back a little bit to, let's just go back to United for Ukraine for a second, our first program. And I just want to mention that once the beneficiaries are paroled into the United States, they're then going to be applying for work authorization on Form I-765. So after arrival, then they file I-765 and indicate, the category of eligibility as having been paroled into the United States. And there's not been, to my knowledge, there's not been any information about, renewals of this yet, because it's such an emergent situation with a war going on. We're going to have to see, 2 years from now when the first batch of these paroles start to expire. We're going to have to see what the government does and how they're handling renewals and things like that. It's just something we'll have to wait and see. But I want to talk about TPS Ukraine. And TPS Ukraine was announced on April 19th. And the application period or registration period is from April 19th until October 19th, 2023. Now, the TPS, as most of you probably know, TPS is a status that is given to those who are nationals of a country where there's some sort of emergency going on, where the Secretary of Homeland Security has determined that it is not safe for nationals of that country or countries who are presently in the United States as of the date that the TPS designation is announced. If it's not safe for them to return to their country, they are granted temporary protected status, allowing them to remain in the United States in lawful status and obtain employment authorization. And TPS is typically granted in something like 21-month increments. And then after 21 months, it comes up for reauthorization, and Department of Homeland Security announces whether TPS for that country is going to be renewed, or they call it redesignation. So the requirements for the TPS Ukraine are that the applicant has continuously resided in the US since April 11th, and they've maintained continuous physical presence in the US since April 19th. As far as what you file for TPS, your basic packet consists of Form I-821, application for TPS, I-765, application for work authorization, either if you're seeking work authorization or even, if the individual wasn't planning on working still, it's a good idea to file it because you get your EAD card, which serves as a form of identification in the United States, and you can then apply for a Social Security card. A G-28 if you're an attorney or accredited representative representing the party. You need proof of identity and Ukrainian nationality. So a copy of their Ukrainian passport or a copy of their birth certificate along with a copy of their photo ID. So you want to prove, if you're using the birth certificate and the photo ID, that's to prove their nationality with the birth certificate and their identity with the photo ID. Or you can use a copy of their national ID card or naturalization certificate along with a photograph and or fingerprint. You need proof of their date of entry. So that's typically a copy of their I-94 record or their passport entry stamp. Or you can also, if you don't have those, you may be able to use copies of documents specified for proof of continuous residence below, which would be employment records, rent receipts, utility bills and receipts, school records from schools in the United States attended, hospital or medical records, or attestations by church, union, or other organizational officials that the individuals have been in contact with here in the United States. So this is how you're going to prove continuous residence. Possibly needed in certain circumstances could be an I-601 waiver if one or more grounds of inadmissibility apply to the applicant. That's not unheard of. And also I-912 if you're seeking a fee waiver for the applicant. Filing location, you can apply for TPS online these days, or else if you're filing by mail, that's going to be either at the Chicago lockbox or the Phoenix lockbox, depending on the state of residence of the applicant. And you want to note that having TPS, this is a note. Now we talked about asylum sort of in the first webinar that we had on the Ukraine war, but having TPS actually stops the clock on the requirement to file for asylum within 1 year of arriving in the US if the clock has not already expired. So if you file for TPS and you haven't already run out the 1 year clock, having the TPS approved will stop the clock. So you can, conceivably come back and file for asylum at a later time or at some point during the process. The question of, I'm not going to cover asylum claims in today's webinar. We talked about them at the last webinar, and it's really a totally separate topic about the various grounds for asylum. Not everybody who is fleeing a war will qualify for asylum. Possibly most people won't. Asylum is a narrowly defined sort of set of criteria. You have to be, fearing persecution on one of the protected grounds. So, it's not simply that you're fleeing a war and therefore, that alone makes you eligible for asylum. That simply isn't the case. All right, well, I wanted to provide you with this information, and this is a short webinar today, but we're going to post this this video along with the links, and I thank you for attending this webinar.